The call came on a quiet Thursday morning while I was polishing the hood of my old Ford pickup. The truck wasn't much to look at: sun-faded paint, a dented fender from a careless grocery cart, but it ran smoother than most cars half its age. I'd rebuilt it myself, piece by piece, during those long winters after Margaret passed. Every bolt, every wire, carried a memory. My phone buzzed on the workbench. The name Elaine lit up the screen, and for a moment, I smiled. My only daughter. We hadn't talked much lately, not since she married Travis Cole. "Hey, Dad," she said, voice clipped and businesslike. "Travis and I wanted to invite you to St. Louis this weekend. There's a private event at the Riverside Pavilion. His company is unveiling a new luxury car model. It's a big deal. He's managing the launch." I could hear the faint hum of traffic behind her, the sound of city life that had long since left me behind. "That sounds nice," I said. "What kind of car?" "The Falcon Vega GT," she replied, with a tone that suggested I should already know. "It's exclusive. Travis helped close the deal for their Midwest clients, so he's sort of the face of the event." Her voice softened, but only slightly. "It'd mean a lot if you came. Just try to dress sharp, okay? There'll be press, investors." She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "You know how appearances matter." I knew exactly what she meant. I'd seen it in her eyes the last time she visited, embarrassment wrapped in politeness. My work boots, my grease-stained hands, my modest house by the Ozark Ridge, none of it fit into the sleek new world she and her husband were building. Still, I smiled. "I'll be there." After she hung up, I set the phone down and looked at the pickup again. Appearances, I thought. Funny how people forget what's under the hood. It had been 2 months since I'd finalized the deal quietly, through a holding company my daughter didn't even know existed. A lifetime in engineering and auto design had left me with more than just experience. It had given me a fortune I never flaunted. I'd sold my third and final business, Benton Performance Systems, to an overseas firm last winter. The deposit had hit my account on a gray January morning. $48 million. I didn't tell a soul. Not Elaine, and certainly not Travis. Because if there's one thing I learned from decades under hoods and boardroom lights alike, it's that people show their true character when they think you have nothing. That afternoon, I packed a small duffel bag, dress slacks, a clean shirt, a jacket Margaret used to call my Sunday best. I paused by the photo of her on the mantel. She was smiling, holding baby Elaine in her arms, grease on her cheek from helping me in the old garage. "Wish you could see her now," I murmured. "You'd still love her even if she's forgotten where she came from." The drive from my small town to St. Louis took nearly 4 hours. As the landscape shifted from open farmland to concrete skyline, I thought about the surprise waiting for them. The dealership Travis bragged about working for, the one he called his empire, was technically mine. I'd bought controlling shares in the parent company 6 weeks ago, after learning that management was under investigation for misreporting inventory. I saw an opportunity, made a quiet investment, and signed under an anonymous Missouri trust. Travis didn't know that the Falcon Vega GT, the car he'd been bragging about for months, was registered in my name. When I arrived at the Riverside Pavilion that Friday evening, the place gleamed like a temple of glass and chrome. Spotlights swept the crowd, champagne sparkled in tall flutes, and the new Falcon sat under a silk cover at the center of it all. Elaine met me at the entrance, her hair pulled back in an elegant twist, pearls at her throat. She kissed my cheek quickly, already glancing around to see if anyone was watching. "Dad, you made it." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Let me find Travis, he's dying to meet you." "Pretty fancy setup," I said, nodding toward the glittering showroom. She laughed nervously. "Yes, it's important to him. Just try not to talk too much about your truck stories, okay? He gets well protective about appearances." I nodded, the old ache settling behind my ribs. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll behave." Travis appeared a minute later wearing a tailored navy suit and the kind of grin that never reached his eyes. "Mr. Benton," he said, shaking my hand with practiced confidence. "Glad you could make it. Hope the drive wasn't too rough on that vintage pickup of yours." I smiled back. "She still runs smoother than most engines here, I bet." He chuckled, not catching the edge in my tone. Well, that's cute. Maybe after the show, I'll let you take a real car for a spin. Something in his voice carried the same oily arrogance I'd heard from men half my age, who thought success came from charm instead of work. As the silk cover lifted from the Falcon Vega GT, applause filled the air. The car gleamed like liquid silver under the lights. Cameras flashed. Travis took the stage, hands raised, smiling for the press. I watched quietly from the edge of the crowd, hands clasped behind my back, the lights reflected in my eyes like fire. They thought I was just another old man in khakis. They had no idea I'd built the world under their wheels. And this weekend, I would remind them gently, at first, because no one appreciates craftsmanship until the engine stops running. The following morning, the Riverside Pavilion shimmered beneath a pale Missouri sun. The Falcon Vega GT stood at the center of the courtyard, like a sculpture, sleek, muscular, and impossibly perfect. Travis was everywhere at once, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, posing beside the car as if it were his own reflection brought to life. I stood near the railing overlooking the Mississippi, hands in my pockets, watching the crowd gather. Businessmen in designer suits, women in evening dresses though it was barely noon, everyone trying to be seen. They didn't notice the old man in the plain gray jacket, leaning quietly against the railing. Elaine joined me, brushing a stray hair from her face. "Dad, can you do me a favor?" she asked softly. "Of course. If anyone asks what you used to do, just say you were in engineering. You don't have to mention the repair shops or the garage, okay? It's just Travis's boss will be here today, and he's a little particular about image." I looked at her for a long moment. She couldn't quite meet my eyes. "I see," I said finally. "Wouldn't want to ruin the family portrait." Her cheeks flushed pink. "Dad, please. I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," I said gently, and smiled to ease her guilt. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll keep my hands clean." The event began with speeches, each one more self-congratulatory than the last. Travis introduced himself as Regional Development Manager, his voice smooth as polished chrome. He boasted about closing international partnerships, about innovation and leadership buzzwords strung together like beads on a cheap necklace. When the applause came, he basked in it. He didn't mention the real work, the engineers who designed the car, the craftsmen who built it, or the quiet man who had bankrolled the dealership's expansion. After the presentation, guests milled around the car, running their fingers along the silver paint like pilgrims touching a relic. I noticed a small group of young interns struggling with the display fountain near the entrance. A water line had burst, spraying an arc of mist across the walkway. Without thinking, I stepped over and crouched beside the base. The pressure valve had popped loose. A simple fix if you knew what you were doing. "Sir, please," one of the interns said nervously. "We'll get maintenance." "It's fine," I said, tightening the bolt with the small wrench I always carried. "Just a loose fitting." A few turns later, the spray subsided, water settling into a calm ripple. Then came the voice I'd come to recognize, the one that dripped with polite venom. "Careful there, old man," Travis called from across the courtyard. "Wouldn't want to scuff the chrome. We already have a maintenance crew, you know. You don't have to play mechanic." Laughter rippled through the nearby guests. Elaine's face drained of color. I began. "Helping?" Travis smirked, approaching with his hands in his pockets. "That's cute, but maybe you should leave the technical stuff to the professionals. These cars aren't like your old Ford, Mr. Benton." I rose slowly, brushing off my hands. "A machine's a machine," I said quietly. "The principles never change." "Sure," he said with a wink to the crowd. "But some people just aren't meant to be on this side of the velvet rope." Elaine grabbed his arm. "Travis, stop it. He was just—" "It's fine," I said, keeping my tone even. "He's right. I should know my place." But inside, something hot and electric flickered beneath my ribs. It wasn't anger yet. It was the hum before ignition. Travis's boss, a tall man with silver hair and a shark smile, joined us. "Everything all right here?" he asked. "Perfectly fine," Travis said smoothly. "Just a little leak. My father-in-law likes to stay busy." The boss chuckled. "A real hands-on type. I like that." Travis laughed with him, then turned back to me. You can watch from the VIP area, Ronald. Elaine will show you. I met his gaze and smiled. The same kind of smile I used to wear in boardrooms when I'd already won, but hadn't told anyone yet. Sure, son, I said quietly. I'll watch. As the crowd dispersed, I lingered near the car. The Falcon Vega GT gleamed in the sunlight, every line of it familiar to me. I'd overseen its prototype designs years before, back when I consulted for an early automotive startup that eventually merged with this very brand. I ran my fingers lightly along the hood, tracing the subtle etching near the license plate. Beneath a thin layer of protective film, barely visible, was a small engraving, HB01, my initials, my model number. Travis was still laughing with his investors a few feet away, unaware of what he stood next to, what he was mocking. I looked at him, then at Elaine, my daughter, who once spent summer nights in my workshop, learning how carburetors breathed, how engines had hearts, just like people. That girl had vanished somewhere along the highway to this glittering place. I turned toward the river, its surface catching the afternoon sun like a sheet of moving glass. They thought I was just a mechanic. They had no idea they were standing inside a story I'd been writing for months. A story where truth, like pressure under a piston, always finds a way to burst free. And when it did, the explosion would echo all the way down the Mississippi. That night, the lights of Street Louis shimmered on the river, like 1,000 restless thoughts. The event had ended hours ago, but the tension it left behind clung to me like oil on skin. Elaine and Travis had invited a few investors and staff members for a private dinner at the dealership's showroom. The Falcon Vega GT sat in the center, gleaming beneath the overhead lights like a silver animal waiting to pounce. Travis was in his element. He moved from table to table, hand on shoulders, laughter too loud, charm too polished. To his audience, he was the man of the hour. To me, he was a man skating on thin ice over deep water. I stood by the coffee machine, listening as he spun another story. The client from Chicago? Yeah. He wired the deposit directly to my account. We're handling all the premium packages through my department now. A younger salesman nodded, impressed. You really built this place up fast, Mr. Cole. Travis chuckled. When you know how to sell dreams, the rest comes easy. Dreams, I thought. Or lies. Elaine noticed me watching and walked over, setting a hand on my arm. Dad, you okay? You're quiet. I'm fine, I said softly, just admiring the car. It's beautiful, isn't it? She said, looking at it with the same awe she once had for the toy cars I built for her when she was 10. Travis says it's worth over $400,000. I smiled faintly. That's what he says. She frowned. What do you mean? But before I could answer, Travis's voice cut across the room. Elaine, sweetheart, come here. I want you to meet Mr. Donovan from headquarters. She hesitated, then went. I watched her leave, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. For a moment, I felt an ache that had nothing to do with money or betrayal, just the deep, quiet pain of a father watching his daughter drift further away. When the last of the guests left, and the showroom lights dimmed, Travis turned to me with that smirk that always managed to crawl under my skin. You don't have to hang around, Ronald. We've got a busy morning tomorrow. Press interviews, test runs, that sort of thing. I'll stay a bit, I said. You don't mind, do you? He shrugged. Suit yourself. Just try not to touch anything. I waited until he disappeared into the office before stepping closer to the car. The Vega's hood caught the glow of the streetlights outside. I ran my hand along the curve of the fender, tracing the subtle imperfections only a builder would notice: the tiny air bubble under the paint, the faint misalignment on the grille. This car wasn't just a product. It was a confession in metal, a testament to patience, skill, and vision. My vision. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Through the glass partition that led to the maintenance bay, Travis and one of his assistants were crouched beside another Vega chassis. They whispered sharply, their faces tight with focus. Curiosity pulled me closer. I moved quietly, the soles of my shoes barely whispering against the floor. Through the half-open door, I caught sight of something that froze me in place. Travis held a wrench in one hand and a phone in the other, recording as his assistant loosened a part near the car's undercarriage. The metallic clink echoed softly. "Careful," Travis hissed. "Just enough to cause a stall, not a full breakdown. We'll file it under manufacturer defect and claim the warranty payout." My stomach turned cold. This wasn't just arrogance, it was sabotage, insurance fraud, and he was using company inventory, my inventory, to pull it off. The assistant straightened. "What about the sensors? They'll know it's tampered with." Travis smirked. "Not if I swap the modules. I've done it before. Trust me, nobody checks twice when you talk fast enough." He laughed, a low, satisfied sound that filled the empty garage. I took a step back into the shadows, heart pounding. The smart thing to do would have been to walk away, call the authorities, let the evidence speak. But I'd learned long ago that some lessons had to be delivered personally. When they left the garage a few minutes later, Travis was still chuckling, wiping his hands with a white towel. I waited until their voices faded down the hallway, then stepped forward. The damage was minor, for now a loose pressure line, a few sabotaged fittings. But left unfixed, it would have caused a failure mid-drive. Exactly the kind of public humiliation he wanted for me. Because I knew now what his plan was. Tomorrow morning, during the press demonstration, Travis would insist I sit beside him for the symbolic father-in-law ride. He'd stage the breakdown, blame my interference from earlier, and turn it into a joke. The humble mechanic who couldn't resist touching a real machine. It was cruel and deliberate. I tightened the fittings quietly, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. Every turn of the wrench felt like tightening a knot around his lies. Then I walked to the far wall, where the surveillance console sat hidden behind a false panel. A simple fingerprint scan unlocked it. 8 camera feeds blinked to life, covering every angle of the showroom, office, and garage. I scrolled back the footage to the last 20 minutes. There it was, Travis and his assistant in crisp detail, faces clear, tools in hand, the sabotage unmistakable. I copied the footage to an encrypted drive, labeling it with the timestamp Falcon Vega GT, 11:42 p.m. When I closed the panel, I caught my reflection in the glass, the lined face, the gray in my hair, the steady eyes that had seen both poverty and power. "People think engines are complicated," I whispered, "but they're simple compared to people." Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the river. A storm was coming. By the time I returned to the hotel, the city lights were flickering with lightning. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, sat by the window, and watched the rain blur the skyline. Tomorrow, Travis Cole would try to break me in front of cameras. But I'd been building engines and empires long before he learned to hold a wrench. And by tomorrow afternoon, I would remind him who taught Missouri how to drive. By the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean beneath a clear Missouri sky. The air smelled of wet asphalt and river wind. I arrived at the Riverside Pavilion early, before the crowd gathered, and stood near the Falcon Vega GT. She gleamed under the morning sun, polished and proud, a machine with a soul. I ran a hand along the hood, checking the fittings I'd retightened last night. Perfect. The car purred softly when I pressed the ignition, steady, responsive, precise. Everything worked flawlessly. Across the room, Travis strutted in wearing dark sunglasses and that same smug grin. "Morning, Ronald," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You ready to make history today? We've got media coverage, investors, even the local news. Try not to get grease on your shirt." I gave him a mild smile. "I'll do my best." Elaine trailed behind him, dressed elegantly but pale. "Dad, don't take anything he says personally. He's just nervous." "Nervous?" I asked, glancing at Travis. "He seems perfectly confident." "Oh, I am," Travis said. "It's just good PR to include family. You know, the humble mechanic father-in-law helps demonstrate the miracle car. Makes for a great human interest story." Mechanic. He used the word like an insult. I looked at the car again, calm and deliberate. "You sure it's safe to drive, Travis? You seemed concerned about performance last night." He blinked, caught off guard for a fraction of a second. "Performance? Nah, This baby's flawless. We ran diagnostics before you got here. You just focus on smiling for the cameras." He said it casually, but I could see the flicker in his eyes, the nervous glint of a man about to play a dangerous game. By 10 o'clock, the press had arrived. Lights, microphones, cameras, it all felt like a stage set for confession. Travis gave his speech flawlessly, all charm and corporate polish. "At Falcon Motors, we don't just build cars, we build legacies." The crowd applauded. Then he gestured toward me. "And today, to honor where we come from, I want to invite my father-in-law, Harold Benton, a man who spent his life under the hood, to ride with me on our first public run." Applause again. I stepped forward, feeling the eyes of 100 strangers on me. I didn't mind. I'd faced tougher crowds, boardrooms full of sharks, courts full of skeptics. Cameras were easy. Travis opened the passenger door with exaggerated courtesy. "After you, Harold." I slid in, my fingers brushing the smooth leather seats. The smell of new upholstery mixed with something else metallic, faintly burnt. A smell I recognized instantly. Tampered wiring. He'd done more than loosen bolts. Travis climbed in beside me, his grin wide and artificial. "Let's show them what perfection looks like." The engine roared to life, strong at first. Then a sharp rattle beneath the hood. The dashboard lights flickered. My pulse quickened, but I stayed silent. We drove slowly around the pavilion, the crowd cheering, phones raised. Then, right on cue, the rattle deepened. Smoke coiled from the grill. The car sputtered once, twice, and died with a loud mechanical cough. A hush fell over the courtyard. Cameras zoomed in. Travis threw his hands up theatrically. "Oh no, what happened?" He turned to me, feigning concern. "Harold, did you touch something earlier? Maybe one of those valves? These systems are pretty sensitive." The humiliation was supposed to sting. That was the plan. He wanted the image, the old man breaking the $1 million machine. But I just smiled faintly. "Maybe it just needs a mechanic." Travis forced a laugh. "Well, lucky for us, we've got one on board." The crowd chuckled awkwardly. Elaine looked mortified. I stepped out, raised the hood, and peered inside. The problem was obvious. The main fuel line coupling had been deliberately disconnected, and a sensor wire twisted out of place. It was the same damage I'd repaired last night, re-sabotaged before the event. I looked up at Travis. "You mind if I fix it?" He spread his arms. "By all means. You're the expert." I reached into the engine bay, hands steady despite the cameras clicking. Years of muscle memory guided me. I tightened the coupling, reattached the wire, and closed the hood with a solid click. Then I turned the ignition. The Vega purred back to life, smooth as silk. The crowd erupted in applause. Travis laughed too, but it was thin now, brittle. "Well, looks like we just needed a little old-fashioned touch," he said. "Thanks, Harold." I wiped my hands on a cloth and met his gaze. "You're welcome, son. Just remember, if you don't understand the heart of a machine, you shouldn't pretend to drive it." For the first time, his grin faltered. A flash of irritation crossed his face before he turned back to the cameras. "Let's wrap it up, folks," he said briskly. "Minor technical glitch, nothing unusual during a prototype run." The reporters didn't buy it. They whispered among themselves, some glancing toward me, others toward the engine bay. When the crowd dispersed, Elaine approached me, her face pale. "Dad, was that your fault?" "No," I said simply. "But he wanted it to be." She frowned. "You're not making sense." I smiled gently. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about the difference between building something and borrowing it." Travis reappeared, voice low and sharp. "You could have played along, Harold. It was supposed to be a harmless PR stunt." "Is that what you call it?" I asked softly. "A stunt?" He leaned closer. "You think fixing an engine makes you special? You don't understand how this world works anymore." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, stepping back. "You just proved it for me." I turned away, leaving him standing there, red-faced and furious, surrounded by the echoes of his own applause, turning into whispers. Inside, I felt calm, eerily calm. The trap he'd set for me had snapped on his own foot. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. Because humiliation wasn't enough. Some men needed to see the truth written in daylight, with witnesses and signatures and seals, and by tomorrow, I'd make sure Travis Cole read every line of it. That night, the dealership showroom stood silent, except for the steady hum of security lights. Outside, the river wind rattled the glass panels, as if urging the truth to come out. I parked my old Ford by the side entrance and walked inside with a key that shouldn't have existed in Travis's world, a master key issued only to majority stakeholders. The lock turned with a satisfying click. I stepped into the darkness, the faint scent of polish and motor oil lingering in the air. The Falcon Vega GT still sat in the center of the showroom, gleaming faintly under the emergency lights. She looked peaceful now, her engine silent, her secrets sleeping. I made my way to the manager's office. Inside, the faint blue glow of the computer monitor illuminated stacks of files. Travis's workspace was as chaotic as his arrogance papers scattered. Invoices unsigned, post-it notes full of reminders he'd never follow through on. But the file I wanted wasn't on his desk. It was behind it. I knelt and pressed a hand against the wooden paneling beneath the credenza. A hidden magnetic latch clicked open, revealing a steel box embedded in the wall. I'd installed that compartment myself 15 years ago when I first consulted for the company that built this dealership. Back then, I'd thought of it as a safeguard, a place for sensitive documents, contracts, or blueprints. Now, it held something far more valuable. Inside was a hard drive, a thick stack of folders, and a small silver key marked Vault B. I smiled. He hadn't found it. Of course he hadn't. Men like Travis never look beneath the surface. They assume what they can't see doesn't exist. I powered on the office computer and plugged in the drive. The screen filled with rows of surveillance timestamps, payroll records, and transaction logs, everything connected to the dealership's financial backbone. I began scrolling through, my eyes catching the irregularities that Travis thought no one would ever check. There it was. Duplicate invoices, manipulated insurance claims, false refund requests. He'd been bleeding the company for months, moving small amounts into side accounts under phony supplier names. A quiet laugh escaped me, half disbelief, half pity. He wasn't even clever about it. He just assumed no one above him cared enough to notice. But I noticed. I opened another tab, security footage. Multiple angles of last night's sabotage played across the monitors, crystal clear. Travis and his assistant bending over the Vega, loosening fittings, laughing quietly. Then today's footage, him standing before reporters, blaming me while the cameras rolled. I watched it twice. Then I copied everything onto a portable drive, labeling the folder Cole Investigation. The truth was now mine to deliver. As I leaned back in the chair, a memory surfaced, sharp and tender. Elaine, at 12 years old, standing beside me in the garage back home, wearing one of my old baseball caps backward. Grease smudged her cheeks. She was holding a wrench that looked too big for her small hands. "Engines are like people, Daddy," she'd said with childlike certainty. "If you take care of them, they take care of you." I'd laughed then. "You're exactly right, sweetheart." But sitting there, staring at the wreckage her husband had created, I realized how far she'd drifted from that truth. Somewhere along the road to wealth and social status, she'd forgotten the rhythm of those words, the honesty behind them. The silver key in my hand caught the faint light from the monitor. Vault B. I remembered exactly where that was. The sub-level storage room beneath the old parts department. I walked down the narrow back hallway, past the glass offices and display shelves, to a door most employees didn't even know existed. The key slid into the lock with a soft metallic whisper. Inside, the air was cool and dry, the smell of machine oil heavy and familiar. Rows of archival boxes lined the walls. I found the one I wanted, a thick binder marked Ownership Transfers, Confidential. Inside were signatures, stamped contracts, and one document that made my chest tighten. Falcon Motors Missouri, Equity Distribution Agreement. Majority holder, Harold Benton, 60%. Minority holder, Cole Holdings LLC, 20%. It was dated 8 weeks ago. Travis had bragged about his company, never realizing the papers he signed were drafted by my attorney under a holding trust. I'd bought into the dealership through Shell subsidiaries, ensuring my name was buried until I chose to reveal it. And now, it was time. I returned to the main floor and paused by the Falcon Vega GT. The showroom was utterly silent except for the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. I ran my hand along the hood one last time, tracing the engraved initials beneath the paint, HB01. My initials, my work, my proof. Tomorrow, the investors and board members would arrive for a quarterly review. Travis planned to brag about record sales and expansion plans. He had no idea that the meeting he'd arranged would become the stage for his undoing. I slipped the portable drive and the ownership binder into my leather briefcase. The zipper closed with a sound that felt final, almost ceremonial. As I stepped outside, the night air hit my face, cool, steady, cleansing. Across the river, the lights of downtown shimmered like constellations reflected in dark water. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Not because revenge was near, but because truth was. Some people thought engines were complicated. But this was simpler. You give a man power he hasn't earned, and sooner or later, he burns out. I locked the door behind me and walked back to my truck. Inside, the old leather seat creaked as I settled in. I started the engine, and the hum filled the silence like an old friend's voice. "Tomorrow, Margaret," I whispered to the empty seat beside me. "Tomorrow, he learns what real ownership means." The headlights cut through the dark as I pulled onto the quiet street. Behind me, the dealership stood still, holding its secrets for one last night. Because by this time tomorrow, every lie Travis Cole ever told would be on display. And the man who mocked me for fixing engines would be the one begging for repair. The next morning broke sharp and bright, the kind of clear Missouri day that left no shadows to hide in. The Falcon Motors dealership shimmered under the sun, banners fluttering above the glass facade. Inside, the staff scurried like ants, preparing for a feast. Investors, reporters, and board members were arriving for the quarterly review. Travis Cole was the first to greet them, sleek suit, polished shoes, and the kind of smile that had fooled almost everyone. "Almost. Gentlemen," he said, extending his hand to a cluster of men in tailored suits. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I'll be presenting our new regional strategy this morning. We've had some minor technical hiccups, but nothing we can't fix." His voice was smooth, confident, utterly convinced of his invincibility. I arrived quietly through the side entrance, briefcase in hand. Elaine stood near the front desk, looking uncertain, her fingers twisting the strap of her handbag. She caught sight of me and exhaled with relief. "Dad," she whispered, walking up quickly. "You came. I thought you might skip this after yesterday." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, smiling faintly. "It's not every day I get to see the future of Falcon Motors." Her brow creased. "Travis was upset about how things looked on camera. He thinks maybe you embarrassed him." I chuckled softly. I imagine he feels that way often. Before she could ask what I meant, a voice rang out across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats." Travis stood at the front of the glass conference area, microphone in hand, flashing that easy confidence he wore like armor. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the company logo and a slideshow of projected growth and expansion 2025. As I took a seat near the back, his words flowed over the crowd like honey: quarterly earnings, projected revenue, partnership with overseas manufacturers. I'd heard enough sales pitches in my life to know when someone was drowning in their own lies. "And of course," he said proudly, "none of this would have been possible without the support of our investors, our customers, and our dedicated leadership team. Falcon Motors Missouri is thriving because of our commitment to innovation." Polite applause filled the room. "Now," Travis continued, clicking to the next slide, "before we move into the financials, I want to address yesterday's unfortunate demonstration issue. Our prototype suffered a temporary malfunction, which we've traced to minor user interference. Thankfully, we resolved it quickly." A ripple of murmurs moved through the audience. "User interference?" one of the investors asked. "From whom?" Travis smiled smoothly. From my father-in-law, actually. That's enough. The voice cut across the room, calm, steady, carrying an authority that made every head turn. I stood up, slow and deliberate. Travis froze mid-sentence, microphone still in hand. "Mr. Benton," he said, forcing a laugh. "Didn't see you back there." "I know," I said. "You don't usually look where the truth stands." The audience chuckled nervously, unsure if it was a joke. I set my briefcase on the table beside me and opened it, the metallic clasps snapping like gunshots in the quiet room. "Before you continue, Travis, I think these gentlemen deserve to see the real quarterly results." I pulled out the portable drive and a folder of papers, then handed them to the meeting technician. "Project these, please." Travis's face drained of color. "That's not necessary, Harold. This isn't your—" But it was too late. The technician plugged in the drive, and the screen behind Travis flickered to life. The first video showed the dealership garage late at night. Travis and his assistant crouched beside the Falcon Vega GT, laughing quietly as they loosened parts beneath the hood. "Careful," Travis's voice echoed through the speakers. "Just enough to cause a stall. We'll file it under warranty and make it look like the old man touched it." A gasp rippled through the room. Elaine's hand flew to her mouth. "What is this?" one of the investors demanded. Travis stammered, "That's taken out of context. This is a setup." But the next clip began before he could breathe. It showed yesterday's event, the car sputtering, the smoke, Travis blaming me before the cameras. His words echoed again. "Harold, did you touch something earlier?" The truth played like a courtroom testimony, undeniable, devastating. I stepped forward, my voice calm. "This footage comes from the dealership's own security system, time-stamped, authenticated, unedited. It shows deliberate sabotage, insurance fraud, and defamation against a fellow member of this company." One of the board members, a heavy-set man in a gray suit, turned to Travis. "You told us the malfunction was an accident." "It was," Travis shouted. "He's manipulating this. He's trying to—" "Sit down, Mr. Cole," the man said coldly. Travis's composure cracked. "You can't believe this. He's just a mechanic." That word again. Mechanic. I smiled faintly. "Funny you should mention that." I pulled another document from the folder and handed it to the lead investor. Falcon Motors Missouri. Equity Distribution Agreement. Filed 8 weeks ago. Harold Benton. Majority shareholder 60%. Cole Holdings 20. The silence was absolute. Even the projector's hum seemed to stop. Elaine stared at me, her eyes wide and wet. "Dad? 60%? I nodded. "I bought my shares quietly, through Benton Industrial Trust. You remember that name, Travis? You signed the agreement yourself." He shook his head violently. No, that's impossible." "It's not impossible," I said evenly. "It's legal and binding." The lead investor stood, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Cole, it appears your position here is untenable." Travis's face twisted, desperation replacing arrogance. "You can't do this. You can't just walk in here and—" "I can," I said softly, "because this isn't your company. It never was." Security entered quietly from the side door. The investors whispered among themselves. Travis backed away, eyes darting, his voice cracking. "Elaine, say something. He's your father. Tell them this isn't—" But Elaine didn't move. She just looked at him, then at me, the truth sinking in like a weight she could barely carry. "Travis," she whispered, "what did you do?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me, hate and disbelief burning in his eyes as the security team escorted him toward the exit. I waited until the door shut behind him, before turning back to the board. "Now," I said quietly, "shall we continue with the meeting?" A few nervous laughs broke the tension. The investors nodded. But my eyes lingered on the glass door, where Travis had vanished into the sunlight. Because humiliation wasn't the end of this story. He'd tried to destroy what I built with my own hands, and soon he'd learned that the man he called a mechanic was about to rebuild everything without him. 3 days passed after the board meeting. But the echoes of that morning still clung to the air like the smell of burnt rubber. News had spread fast. Regional manager exposed in fraud scandal. Travis Cole's face was plastered across business sites and local TV stations, his once charming grin replaced by a mugshot of disbelief. I should have felt satisfaction, justice maybe, but instead I felt the hollow quiet that comes after an engine shuts down when all the noise fades, and you're left with the echo of what used to be. That Tuesday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, the sunlight slanting through the blinds in thin gold lines. Outside, the Ozark Hills were turning green again. Spring had a way of reminding you that nothing stays broken forever. A soft knock came at the door. I knew that knock before I even moved. Elaine stood there, wearing a pale blue coat and no makeup. Her eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. For the first time in years, she looked like my little girl again, the one who used to follow me around the garage, with a wrench in her hand and endless questions in her voice. "Dad," she whispered, stepping inside. I gestured toward the chair across from me. "You found the place all right?" She gave a small, sad laugh. "It's not like you moved. You never do." We sat in silence for a moment. The clock on the wall ticked softly. She finally spoke. "Travis was arrested last night. They said the fraud charges could go federal. He kept saying it was a setup." I nodded. "That sounds like him." Her hands trembled around the coffee cup I'd handed her. "I didn't know, Dad. I swear I didn't know what he was doing." "I believe you." Her head lifted, surprise flickering in her eyes. "You do?" "Of course," I said. "You were raised to be honest, not blind. You just forgot how to look." She stared down at her cup, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I thought we were building a life, Dad. Travis said he was managing investments, expanding the business. He said you'd never understand how money works now." I smiled faintly. "Funny, that's exactly what I heard him say before I bought the company out from under him." That made her laugh, a broken, wet laugh that turned into a sob. She buried her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry. I was ashamed of you that day at the car launch. I didn't defend you. I just stood there and let him make you feel small." I reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, shaking. "You can't make me small, sweetheart. I've spent my life building things that last. People like Travis build mirrors, they only reflect themselves until they shatter." She squeezed my hand, eyes glistening. "Why didn't you tell me you owned the company? Or that car?" I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Because I didn't buy them for me." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I opened the drawer beside me and took out a folder, the same one I'd shown at the board meeting. I slid it across the table toward her. "Do you see the second name under the original ownership filing?" Her brow furrowed as she read. "Elaine Cole?" I nodded. "I listed you as co-beneficiary. I was planning to transfer full ownership of the dealership to you and Travis this summer. It was supposed to be a surprise, an anniversary gift." She blinked, her mouth opening slightly. "You were going to give us the company?" "I was," I said quietly, "until he decided to humiliate me in front of a crowd and ruin the very car I meant to hand him the keys to." For a moment, the only sound was the ticking clock. Then she whispered, "Dad, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve anything after how I treated you." I smiled sadly. "You're wrong. You deserve better than him. You always have." She wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "What will you do now?" "I already did it," I said. "Yesterday, I transferred ownership of the company to the Benton Foundation. It'll fund scholarships and training programs for young mechanics across Missouri. Kids who love engines the way you once did." Her lips parted. "You gave it all away?" "Not away," I said softly. "I gave it back to the kind of people who understand what work means." Elaine stood slowly, tears still shining on her cheeks. "You're still teaching me lessons, aren't you?" "I suppose I am," I smiled faintly. "Engines don't run without friction. Neither do people. The trick is knowing how to use it to move forward." She crossed the room, hesitated, then threw her arms around me. It was the kind of hug that carried years of silence, pride, regret, and forgiveness. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she whispered against my shoulder. and I'm ashamed it took me this long to say it. Better late than never, I murmured. We stood there a while, two stubborn souls finally remembering they were family. When she left, the air in the house felt lighter. I walked out to the garage, where my old Ford waited. Dust motes drifted through the sunlight streaming from the open door. On the workbench sat the brass nameplate I'd once removed from my office years ago, Harold Benton, founder. I wiped the dust away and held it in my hands for a long moment. The phone rang. It was a reporter from the Missouri Herald. She wanted a statement. "Mr. Benton, how does it feel to expose corruption and reclaim your company?" I looked at the sunlight glinting off the nameplate. "It doesn't feel like reclaiming," I said. "It feels like remembering who I was before I let someone else define me." When I hung up, I placed the nameplate back on the wall. Not for ego, for closure. Outside, a soft breeze stirred the oak trees by the fence. I could almost hear Margaret's voice again, laughing faintly. "You always did like a dramatic ending, Harold." I smiled. "No, my love," I whispered. "Just an honest one." The company was gone. The fortune, too. But in its place stood something purer, a truth no one could sabotage. And somewhere in Street Louis, Travis Cole was finally learning the hardest lesson of all. The difference between owning something and being worthy of it. 1 year later, the world had grown quieter in the best possible way. The Benton Foundation's training center sat on the edge of the Missouri River, where the morning fog rolled low and soft over the water. It used to be an old warehouse for engine parts now. Laughter and the rhythmic clink of tools filled its walls. I sat on the porch, outside my small cabin just upriver from the center, sipping coffee as the sun crept over the horizon. The river shimmered gold and silver, alive with light. My dog Duke snored at my feet, tail twitching in a dream. Somewhere downstream, a train whistle echoed faintly, steady, dependable, familiar. It was a good sound. From where I sat, I could see half a dozen young mechanics already at work in the open-air workshop. They were kids from small towns across Missouri, sons and daughters of farmers, welders, single parents who couldn't afford college. Now they were learning how to rebuild engines, diagnose systems, and, more importantly, rebuild themselves. "Morning, Mr. Benton," a boy called from the yard. "We got the carburetor working." "Good," I shouted back. "Remember, listen to the engine. It'll tell you what it needs if you stop talking long enough." The boy laughed, ducking back into the garage. The truth was, I didn't miss the boardrooms, or the money, or the glass offices that overlooked cities. I missed the sound of work done right, the hum of an engine fixed by honest hands. That was what this place gave me back. A car door closed behind me, gentle and familiar. I turned. Elaine stood by a silver sedan, her hair tied back, wearing jeans and a plain white shirt smudged with grease. She waved, smiling in that unguarded way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. "Morning, Dad," she said, climbing the porch steps with a paper bag in hand. "I brought biscuits, and Duke's favorite jerky." Duke's ears perked up immediately. I chuckled. "He might love you more than I do." "Impossible," she said with mock seriousness, handing me a biscuit. We sat side by side, eating quietly as the sun climbed higher. A gentle wind rustled through the oak trees behind us. She broke the silence first. "The Foundation's doing amazing things, Dad. You've got people talking all over the state. Scholarships, apprenticeships, you even got a feature in Midwest Today." I smiled. "Not bad for an old mechanic, huh?" She looked at me, eyes shining. "You're not just a mechanic. You're the man who taught me that fixing something doesn't mean it's broken. It means you care enough to make it right." Her words caught me off guard. I looked at her and saw not the lost girl from Street Louis, but a woman who had rebuilt herself the hard way, honestly. She leaned back in her chair. "You know what I've been doing lately? Enlighten me. Teaching, 2 days a week, engine diagnostics. I figured someone should help the kids when you're not here." I stared at her for a moment, warmth spreading through my chest. "You're doing fine, Elaine. Better than fine." She shrugged lightly, but I saw the pride in her eyes. "Guess I learned from the best." The river glimmered as we sat there, the sunlight dancing on the surface like sparks from a welding torch. For a long time, Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to fix, nothing left to prove. Only the quiet hum of life running smoothly again. Elaine stood and brushed off her jeans. Come on, Dad. The students want to show you their latest project. They rebuilt that old Vega you donated. It runs like new. I laughed softly. Does it now? Yeah, she said, smiling wide. They even engraved something on the dash. HB01. I looked out toward the workshop, where a flash of silver caught the sunlight. The same car that had once been used to humiliate me, now reborn, under the hands of kids who respected the work. The wind carried the faint sound of the engine starting, purring steady and sure. Listen to that, I said quietly. That's the sound of redemption. Elaine slipped her arm through mine. No, Dad, she said softly. That's the sound of legacy. We stood together on the porch, watching the river flow endlessly forward, the past finally at peace behind us. In the end, I learned that revenge doesn't always come with fire or fury. Sometimes, it arrives in the gentle hum of a fixed engine, in a daughter's forgiveness, in the steady rhythm of water against the shore. Because when you build with honesty, even the storms can't tear you down. And as the sun rose higher over Missouri, I finally understood. The truest measure of wealth is not what you own, but what still runs after you're gone. Respect isn't earned by money, titles, or polished shoes. It's built, bolt by bolt, through integrity, patience, and heart. And when arrogance tries to dismantle it, truth always turns the wrench.